A recovery with love when I next see you. With caresses, with ecstasy. It's good to see you, Baba.
It's good to see you, my darling.
I finished this work for you.
You need help with that?
Okay. I'm sending this to my family back home.
If you want, I can drive you to the post office. That's okay with your boyfriend.
He's not my boyfriend.
You're safe now. You're here with me.
You don't know what you're talking about. That man, I was paying him to marry me for a green card.
Gorgeous.
I need to tell you something.
It doesn't matter to me.
Gihangol ko sa imong paghikap. Kalukog na ako sa dilaang.
Hello, my name is Spiro Economopoulos and I am the Program Director for the Melbourne Queer Film Festival. What you just saw was a trailer for Lingua Franca, which is screening as part of MQFF Interrupted from the 19th to the 30th of November. In 2019, Lingua Franca made history at the Venice International Film Festival for being the first film accepted into official competition directed and starring a trans woman of colour. I'm very excited to have the director of the film joining me. Isabel, hello.
Hi, Spiro. Thank you so much.
How are you? Oh, my pleasure. I mean, firstly, how are you doing with everything that's going on at the moment?
I've been doing well, considering I'm also an introvert, to be honest. So I kind of thrived during the lockdown. I've been productive. I finished the script for my new feature, and I'm writing for a TV show as well.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of introverts who are thinking this is their time at the moment. So, just firstly, so this is your third feature, but it's your first feature that you shot in America, and it was also the first feature that you made after your gender transition. The film Lingua Franca draws, I guess, indirectly on your personal experiences as a Filipina transgender migrant. Can you talk a little bit about the genesis of the story?
Sure. So I started writing the script for Lingua Franca around 2015 when, while I was transitioning. And back then it was more of a straightforward romantic drama where the main source of the conflict was really Olivia becoming romantically involved with a man who was not aware initially that she's trans. But then the 2016 presidential election happened and Trump got into the White House. And just like a lot of minorities living in the US, I felt like I was plunged into a kind of existential crisis. I was feeling very vulnerable and anxious and tense, especially during those first few months of his presidency. And that was when the final premise of Lingua Franca came together, about it being an undocumented Filipina trans woman who, becomes involved with a Russian Jewish man as she's trying to pursue a path to citizenship. It's not autobiographical because fortunately I do have papers to be in the US, but Lingua Franca is essentially a distillation of my mood and emotional state during those first 6 months.
Oh, right. Okay. And it's and actually it's set in this really interesting kind of place in Brooklyn amongst this very traditional Russian Jewish community. Was that a place that you were really familiar with, or was it something that was very much part of the story right from the beginning?
Yeah, by the time we shot the film, I've lived in Brooklyn for about 4 years, and in movies about New York City, it's almost always set in Manhattan, so you see the Empire State Building, Manhattan skyscrapers. But in the outer boroughs like Queens and Brooklyn, there are, diverse ethnic neighborhoods and communities that retain their unique character and their heritage. And even Brooklyn itself, I live in a neighborhood called Crown Heights, which is a lot like Williamsburg, gentrified and hip and edgy. But only, if I take the train to South Brooklyn, just half an hour away from me, you get to Brighton Beach. And when I'm there, I feel like I'm whisked off to a totally different, not just country, but planet in some sense, in a different time period. And
Yeah,
so I wanted to showcase a sort of hidden or secret New York in Lingua Franca.
Yeah, it's very specific, the place. It's really, really evocative, actually. The project, was this actually something that you always envisioned as a vehicle for yourself to star in? Was that actually something that sort of happened later on in the development of the film?
For Lingua Franca, it is. It's definitely by, with intention that I wanted to both tell the story in front of and behind the camera. And because I was also acutely aware that this being my first film set in the US and my first post-transition, as you mentioned, that it's going to be a calling card for me as a filmmaker trying to make it to Hollywood. So I was very relieved and vindicated that I was able to pull off, what I did in the film. And it's I'm very grateful that it's being received well internationally.
Yeah. And you actually wear a lot of creative hats on the project, because you not only do you star in it, you obviously directed it, you wrote it, you edited it as well from which is really incredible. Is this a way that you like to work as a filmmaker, or was this something that's kind of born out of necessity as an independent filmmaker?
It's a little bit of both. I wanted to showcase what I am capable of as a filmmaker, and those specific creative hats that I took on in making Lingua Franca are, I think, the key ones to make sure that I'm able to translate my vision from the page to the screen faithfully and without compromise. And yeah, especially editing the film, I think it's really when you're cutting the film that the film comes together.
Yeah. Okay. It has a really sort of interesting, I guess, deliberate pace and sensibility about it, which is really evocative. And at times it sort of almost shifts into something that you would call maybe paranoid thriller in some aspects as well, at different sort of stages. Were there any touchstone films that you had in mind when you were making the projects, or were there films that kind of maybe inspired the tone and the style of the movie?
Definitely. I had a few influences, including Chantal Ackerman, the Belgian filmmaker with News from Home, and Wong Kar-wai's In the Mood for Love is also an influence in terms of the languid pace and the delicate tone, and in terms of it being a paranoia thriller. Klute by Alvin Packle in the 70s, starring Jane Fonda, which is also set in New York. I was also very much inspired by that. So even though I did not consciously pay an homage to these films, but they were films that were very important to me during my formative years as a filmmaker. And so it was only after the fact that I realized that those influences subconsciously merged.
It's great that you mentioned Clued. Actually, it was a film that I kind of thought a little bit about when I was watching it as well. It's really wonderful. The central romance between Alex and Olivia is really, really interesting, and it could have gone down a very familiar path but you take it in a really interesting direction, and it's sort of interesting in that it ends up kind of, I guess, exploring the vulnerabilities that undocumented migrants sometimes face in America, and in particular trans women. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, certainly. I set it up in a way to um, kind of cater to expectations, because I feel like a lot of films featuring about trans women being involved with cisgender men almost always involve instances of physical violence. And I realized that in terms of the atmosphere of the film and the initial act, that I'm steering it in that direction. But that's when I subvert expectations, because I didn't want to have it be just another film where the trans woman gets, beaten up or tortured, but I want to focus on a different kind of violence that the vulnerable experience. And that's psychological and emotional violence, when Alex gaslights her and tells her that ICE agents are after her. And I feel like, because the film is ultimately a drama of interiority, it's about the psyche of these characters and how they're unable to freely express what they feel about each other. And in fact, they spend the entire film in a way to really muster the courage and the bravery to tell the other person how they feel.
Yeah. It's really kind of it's a really sort of powerful part of the story. Actually, it's really interesting where it kind of leads, without saying too much about it, if people haven't watched it.
Yeah.
Over the last few years, it's been kind of actually a really kind of incredible sort of, I guess, burst of trans cinema, actually. And I guess as a film programmer, I see a lot of really fantastic trans films. And I think more importantly, you see those voices central, like in front of the camera and in behind the camera as well. And I was kind of wondering, as a filmmaker, have you seen your opportunities kind of change because of that? Have you seen that shift?
Definitely, I feel like, especially in the last few years, in the US most especially, when there is really a push for representation and diversity, and stories about minority characters, there's definitely an awareness now and an effort to have those stories be told from a first person perspective and from members of the communities that they're part of. Like Lingua Franca, for instance, when I was developing it, I was able to receive grants from different film organizations, and institutions in the US, like the Tribeca Film Institute, Frameline, which is also a major LGBTQ film festival.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Wow, that's really great, actually. You touched on it actually really briefly just at the start, but your next project, which I was reading about, Tropical Gothic, I think it's called, sounds fascinating, and it's actually from what I was reading, it's your first project that you may be making back in the Philippines as well, potentially. Is that something that's still going ahead? Can you talk a little bit about it? Has it been impacted by the pandemic at all?
Yeah, so that's the script that I finished writing during the pandemic, and it's set in the 16th century in the Philippines. It's a colonial drama about a native priestess who pretends to be possessed by the spirit of her Spanish master's dead bride in order to avenge the fact that she was dispossessed of her property and farmland. So it's a very another psychologically intense drama, and it's my riff on Hitchcock's Vertigo. But what I'm also very excited about the film is that, as of a few weeks ago, just confidentially, I'm now being repped by a major Hollywood talent agency as a writer-director.
That's brilliant.
Help me put the financing together for this film. So
yeah. That's really exciting. Oh, that's so great. And I'm glad that obviously, a lot of film productions really had to kind of shift during this whole time. So it's really great to hear films are still kind of getting made.
Yeah.
Isabel, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate you taking the time out. Very excited that our audience is finally going to get to see Lingua Franca. It's a really wonderful film, and I can't wait to see what you do next. So thank you again for joining us. Really appreciate that.
Of course. Thank you, Spiro, and good luck and congrats with the Melbourne Queer Film Festival this year.
Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.